Great. Okay, I'll give it one more minute and then. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, not too bad. Went around, did some collections today, which I can chat more about later, but it was a nice day out for driving, so it was good all around. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Matt, how is sunny California?
It's good. It's sunny. Yeah, no, we've been having some very nice weather here, so I can't complain.
Awesome. Okay, well, that's great. Well, let's get started. And then, as people trickle in, I'll just admit them as we go along. But welcome, Mario, Tara, Austin, and Evelyn to tonight's Impact Zero meeting. I'm Mary Kate, for those of you who I haven't met. I'm the community manager here at Impact Zero, and during my 9 to 5, I'm a sustainability strategy and disclosure consultant at ERM. So yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. So we have Matt and Charles here. I'll give a little bit of an intro for them, and then we'll jump right in. So Matt is the founder of Iterant, a business-to-business marketplace for packaging reuse. Iterant's vision is a world where convenient and profitable reuse becomes the default for all manufactured goods. Prior to founding Iterant, Matt spent 17 years working on multiple aspects of the clean energy transition, including roles at Tesla, Texas Instruments, and Amber Kinetics. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering from UC Berkeley. Thanks for joining us, Matt. So next we have Charles here. Charles is a graduate of the BBA program from Wilfrid Laurier University. While there, Charles became passionate about sustainability and making it easy for brands to participate. Sorry, I'm just admitting people. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay. While there, Charles became passionate about sustainability and making it easy for brands to participate in the circular economy, which is why we're here. Circular is building the infrastructure that cities need to close the loop with reusable packaging. By partnering with awesome local brands and retailers, Circular is helping brands reuse their packaging. All right, so we have a few more people. I'm just going to admit them, and then we'll jump right in. All right, so maybe we can start off with sharing a little bit about why you both wanted to kind of get in the circular space. So Matt, go ahead. Maybe you can start us off.
Sure. Yeah. So, as you said, I spent the first part of my career in the energy space, which, obviously is very important. But, after doing that for a while, I wanted to see what else is out there. But still was felt very strongly about sustainability. And, just as I started learning about circular economy stuff, it just really got me excited. I think in many ways, it's a less mature space, which means that there's all kinds of opportunities to, try out new business models, to build new businesses, to really have an impact in the early stages of this transition that we all are trying to make happen. So it really appealed to a lot of aspects of my sort of engineering mindset and training around making systems that work properly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of a challenge that keeps me engaged, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about you, Charles?
Yeah, I think for me, it was sort of just, whenever I say it, I always think it sounds like such a typical story that I think so many of us go through, which is, I'm a pretty passionate, outdoor enthusiast. I love going on runs and kayaking. And, one of the things you notice, whether even you're just walking down the sidewalk, especially right now, if you're living in Toronto, is that there is trash everywhere. And it's just one of those things that you can, turn a blind eye to it for only so long. And then once you start realizing it, you're like, I see this everywhere. And it's so frustrating for me in particular. When I was at University in Waterloo, there's this one field on my walk home that I would go by every day, and it was just packed with litter. And I was like, how could people keep littering all this? This is like ridiculous. When I realized one day was that it wasn't people littering, it was even my own recycling and trash bin that I had to put out on the side of the road, that when, you know, collectors came by, stuff would blow out, bags would break, you know. It was just, when you were looking at it, I was like, oh, I'm doing this, like I'm the problem. And, you know, as a business student, I thought, you know, how can I solve this? And the thing that came to mind was, you know, well, to create demand for this, I have to create supply. And so I'll start creating, you know, backpacks out of recycled waste. And that's what I originally started doing. And I'm not fashionable at all. I wear sweatpants almost every day. So, you know, creating a clothing company wasn't really my cup of tea. And what I really realized was that, you know, to actually stop the waste right from the beginning, not just trying to turn it into something new, is, you know, you have to stop it right from the beginning. And what I'm doing now is just trying to help companies stop it right from the beginning with a reuse system that's really easy for them to join.
Yeah. And so maybe building on that, we can go into more about like what each of you do and some of the similarities in both of your work. And then, you know, the mission behind it, although we've, you know, did hear about like the passion and, you know, where it came from originally. Yeah, maybe we can take a bit of a deeper dive in like, you know, your day-to-day, what you both do in both of your separate but similar work.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, for some of you who are on right at the beginning of the call, I was doing my collections today. And what that essentially is we work with consumer packaged good brands. So those are brands that you find in a grocery store, and we help them reuse their packaging. And the way we do that is by setting up these collection bins currently around Toronto and Guelph. These collection bins are, you know, really empowered by customer use of the system. So once a customer is done with packaging from one of the brands we work with, or we, you know, set up a system where they can actually, you know, return that jar, we clean it, we wash it, we remove the label, so that they can use it again. I've actually become a really big fan of one of the companies we work with. Well, I'm a big fan of all of them, but one I have with me right now is Filsinger's. So they do applesauce. And for example, after I'm done using this container, all I'll do is I'll wash it out and drop it out one of our collection bins. We then take care of removing the label, you know, sorting it with other Filsinger items that we get back, and then we sell that jar back to them, so that for them, it's really just truly as easy as, you know, a normal single-use system, where, you know, they're just buying the packaging. They don't have to worry about any of the logistics behind how that packaging is getting in their door. So that's really how we're running it.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Charles. And what about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I am essentially trying to enable exactly the kind of model that Charles has. And in fact, he was, you know, adventurous enough to be one of my first users on my site. What I'm doing is basically creating a marketplace where, you know, you take the examples of the great stuff that Charles is doing and multiply that by, you know, city by city by city, you know, country by country. And you have essentially this army of companies that are working on this collection problem. And so what I'm trying to do is provide a platform where they can connect with the buyers who might be, you know, in the case of packaging, might be food producers or beverage producers. You know, the sort of insight that I had was, when you're talking about post-consumer stuff, by definition, it is just widely distributed, you know, at the level of individual households.
Right.
And so to recover that stuff, you need distributed collection systems. And really, for most packaging, you want to reuse it locally, because in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense to ship across the country. And so, you know, that marketplace approach can enable these local reuse networks without, trying to somehow build out a centralized system that collects everything in one spot and then spits it all back out. Let the local businesses who know the area, figure out what works best for them.
Mhm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's a lot of similarities, sorry. And I mean, Charles is really doing like the ground level local collection. And then Matt, like I really enjoy how Iterant is the more far reaching, but here, like, let's let the local businesses figure out how they want to do, like, run this part of it. Because you're still solving the same problem at the end of the day. But it's like, how can, obviously there's so many different ways to go about it. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about circular economy. So I guess on that, what are some of the barriers that both of your businesses are facing right now? Maybe some of the challenges, whether that's with regulations, whether that's the businesses themselves who are producing the packaging that we're seeing on the street, or those who don't want to take responsibility for it, or just the day-to-day things that you're finding to be challenging. Maybe shed some light on some of those.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can start. I mean, on some level, I think I'm in the very early stages of what I'm doing, and on some level, what makes it difficult is that a lot of the infrastructure is not there, and that's part of the mission is to incentivize that to get put in place. But Charles and Circular is kind of in the vanguard of that kind of business model, and so we need to replicate that across the whole world. And so the real sort of growth of what I'm trying to do will come when that becomes a more and more common function, and that infrastructure gets built. I think beyond that, I think this is going to proceed in phases, because a lot of the way that forward supply chains are set up is very antithetical to the recovery portion of the process. So you take the example of Coca-Cola, which obviously everyone would love for Coke, or certainly everyone here would love for Coke to go back to all reusable, bottles. They still use them in some places, certainly not in the US. But if you go back several decades, they did have reusable bottles in the US, and the model was one where they had local bottling plants that would get essentially deliveries of syrup in bulk from Coca-Cola, and mix it, dilute it, and fill bottles. Over time, what's happened is that economies of scale and just the economics of plastic bottles with no responsibility for recovery push them towards a centralized model where they have many fewer bottling plants now, which again then makes it harder to do reuse and get those bottles back to those more distant points. Right. So in the case of local brands like some of the ones that Charles mentioned, that's a great opportunity because a lot of their business is in a concentrated area. It's going to take some evolution, and in the later phases of this process, once we can demonstrate these business models, that you might sort of change the strategy of a company as large as Coke.
Right.
So that's it's a challenge, but it's also just it's an evolutionary process.
And do you feel at this stage that the evolutionary process is moving at the pace that it should be, or?
I mean, it could always be faster, right? I mean, again, like one of the things that attracted me to this in the first place was just that it is very early. And so, you imagine, you know, if you imagine an evolutionary process, at the early stages, you can have a lot of impact. You
Mhm.
know, the little creature crawls out of the ocean, you know, evolving, and you know, if you're there to squash it, you're going to change the direction of, you know, history essentially.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where we are, as I see it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And we do have a question in the chat for you. I don't know if do you guys want to take questions as we go along? Maybe that'll be easier to.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
doing it as we go along is fine. But I'll hop in here while Matt's reading that, and
Yeah.
maybe I'll hopefully touch on some of those points that the question asked. Anyways, but yeah, I think, you know, growth is always going to be, you know, the problem in any business. So I don't think it's especially, you know, pertinent to what we're doing. Um, you know, every business, it needs to get higher levels of scale and, you know, reduce costs and things like that. The one sort of growth or thing that's, you know, potentially limiting that growth right now is, you know, awareness of systems, and, you know, how do we get, you know, as high a reuse rate as possible and things like that. So that's
Mhm.
one of the things we're toying with right now. We're trying to provide incentives in form of points and using deposits and, you know, all these different mechanisms to boost that reuse rate as much as possible. The other one, you know, is just so common, and just, you know, if we're going to change the system, it really has to be from the ground up. Is what you realize is, you know, glass jars are reusable, but more often than not, the labels are extremely hard to remove in the first place, and that makes them very hard to reuse. So,
Mhm.
you know, for example, the beer store in all the beer in Ontario, you know, they have the same label that comes off with high heat and a caustic soda solution. And they have, you know, massive machines that wash tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of these an hour. You know, so they've been ready, and they've, you know, figured out labels and all these things, but to really, you know, get the system going, it has to be, you know, a hard process of changing over some of the packaging we've been using.
Mhm.
And that'll only be, you know, shown more when, you know, companies like ourselves can show that it is cost effective for businesses to actually transfer over to reusables, even with subsidies and, you know, plastics and things like that. We can be cost competitive when we look at, you know, the cost to wash being much lower than the cost to, you know, make something, make virgin materials. And at the end of the day, I think the thing that both Matt and I are doing is, we don't want this to be hard. Like, we want this to be super easy for everyone involved. Like, my dream is that people, and this may sound backwards, but people are, you know, disposing of their items the same way they are with their single use items. It's
Mhm.
nice when people are really caring and thinking about what they're doing with that packaging, and I hope everyone gets there. But we
Mhm.
don't want it to be harder than what disposable packaging or single use packaging is now.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, the massive majority of people won't switch if it's not as easy.
No,
Um,
exactly. I think that's one of the toughest parts about this whole crisis is that people get so confused when they look at a recycling bin and they say to themselves, well, where does it go? Is this cup recyclable in this municipality? Is it not in another municipality? If I go from London to Toronto, it's going to be completely different. So why are we making people's heuristic mindset more difficult on them? And I mean, that can also be said for like, okay, yeah, they just need to figure it out and read it. But like you said, it can also just be as easy as just putting it into one place and being like, okay, that is what it is. And, you know, half of the recycling that we put in recycling doesn't actually end up in recycling. So it's like, what are we doing? We got to make it easy for people. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Matt, did you want to answer the question that
Yeah,
was for you? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
sure. So I'll read the question for people who might not have opened the chat. It says, what incentives are there from the local business standpoint to jump into Iterant's marketplace as you're intending? Just thinking about limited resource and capacities to take on another project. Um, uh, Absolutely a great question and a great insight there. It's kind of like, you know, Charles was saying, we have to make it easy. And so, you know, one of the things that I need to do to make the marketplace successful is to make it feel like, you know, the type of sales channel that, you know, people would would use to buy new stuff. So in the case of a food producer, let's say Charles's example where they're making applesauce, and if it's a small company, and they're buying new glass jars, maybe they get it through some kind of a distributor, maybe they get it directly from a glass manufacturer, but they have a channel that they're used to working with, with their purchasing people. And so, what I need to do is to make the experience just like that. And that means having a sufficient quantity of the style of jar that they use, and making sure that they're clean and they're arriving in exactly the form that they want to use. And yeah, it's not necessarily easy. Particularly without when you don't have a lot of standardization. Standardization is really key to to a lot of these reuse systems. But again, if you can focus on local producers that sell most of their product locally, you've got a shot at recovering the type of container that they use. The thing that I have zeroed in on is actually as sort of a product that I think really works well for my business model, are these beer can carriers. And so what's really interesting about these is that they're pretty easy to collect. They don't take up much space, and they actually do nest a little bit. They do need to be clean, but they don't actually touch food, so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. There are like 9,000 breweries in North America, and many of them use these. Somehow it has become somewhat of a standard without any kind of organized process, I guess just market forces or whatever. So these are pretty easy to find, and there's lots of breweries all over the place. Every city has a dozen breweries, and a lot of them use these. So this is one thing I'm making a big push on, because it overcomes exactly some of the the points that were made in that question, which are legitimate challenges. And for as an entrepreneur, one of the things you have to do is just be a little bit opportunistic to find the path of least resistance. And so my hope is if I can demonstrate business model with this, I can use that example to motivate the more difficult types of recovery and resale challenges.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's like the low hanging fruit. And sometimes you got to start there and then work your way out. Yeah, no, that's excellent. And very interesting. Like it's without the standardization part of it, that actually without having like a regulated or like a policy coming in is very, very fascinating.
Yeah, I've just as an aside, as I've talked to people, there was a fairly big shift during COVID, where a lot of these smaller breweries did most of their business through kegs, and basically draft beer sales to restaurants or bars or whatever. And when all the bars shut down for COVID, they suddenly had to shift all of their production. And the thing that was, for a lot of them, seemed to be easiest and cheapest was a canning system. And so they settled on these cans. And then when you have to keep the cans together, there's a few options, but a lot of them ended up going with these.
Neat. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's really helpful. Awesome. Oh, Mario does have a question about customer behavior. Charles, I'm not sure, or Matt, who wants to take that?
Yeah, I can touch on that. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, like I said, that's sort of like our number one priority right now. It's, customers who care about sustainability will bring back jars without any incentivization, but that's not, not sustainable in terms of actually having the whole system replicate that. It'd be nice if, you know, there was enough education there that that was commonplace. But like I said, our goal is to make this as easy or easier and more impactful for the customer to just reuse their packaging. I mean, I always joke about how we have a blue bin and green bin. I would love one day to have, you know, a purple bin for reuse in the sense that, you know, eventually everything you put in there will just be that we, you know, drop off a new bin every week and put that bin into like a reuse truck, if you will. So I think that's, you know, very likely where that system will go eventually. The reason why, you know, retailers are used right now is just because it's, you know, the easiest sort of thing to pitch for people having, you know, one centralized place for return. More often than not, the retailers we work with also sell the brands that we work with. So for them, it's beneficial because if a customer goes into their store, you know, buys that item, then they're more likely to, you know, return it to that store and buy it again because, you know, they're thinking, hey, I'm returning this Filsinger's jar. Oh, I'm out of Filsinger's. In the same way that, you know, the milk store, or not the milk store, Harmony Organic milk companies do it so effectively right now is because they are getting a lot of those repeat purchases and they have really effective, you know, incentivizations behind them, whether it's deposits like, you know, we're seeing with Harmony Organic with a $2 deposit on top of the item. Or companies like, if you're familiar with them, For All Ice Cream, I believe they put some sort of incentivization, you know, when you return 5, you get a discount. So, you know, those are the incentivizations that in the short term will attract those people who aren't necessarily, you know, so environmentally conscious that they're going to make that, you know, like you said, it is a hassle to bring those items back. But what we're also hoping is that this collection system is so widespread that you're already going to be going into that grocery store anyways. In the same way that you bring your reusable bags, you'll be bringing those reusable items and just simply dropping them off as you enter the store. So that's, you know, that's what we're hoping is the, you know, short-term solution. But the 10-20 year one is going to be one that's, you know, much easier to use, and maybe you won't even need that incentivization anymore.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on too, when businesses have to start taking responsibility, they're going to have to start getting really creative about their own solutions too. And I think that's going to be where the door opens for both Iterant and Circular. I mean, even more so than they have now, right? So going off of that, what are some,
So could I just throw in an additional just kind of point there?
Yeah, of course.
You know, I think you know, agree with everything Charles said. It's all about, you know, convenience for the consumer. I think, you know, like I was saying, we're going to go through phases. At the moment, you know, the people who are participating in this are sort of your early adopters who are willing to take their stuff back to the store. You know, to get to scale, I think probably, you know, it is the case that like some kind of curbside system would be the ideal. What's really encouraging to me is that I've come across and spoken with a number of companies that are kind of pioneering that model. So there's a company called Ridwell that's based in the Seattle area. There's another one called the Happy Beetle that's based in Denver. And I keep coming across new ones, you know, frequently. But these are basically companies that have a subscription model where they will come to your door and collect things that are hard to dispose of, but that really shouldn't go in the trash. So, you know, they'll collect clothing, batteries, flexible plastic, stuff that, you know, it varies, as you were saying at the beginning, you know, what your local sort of people collect. I can bring that stuff to a recovery center, you know, in my town, but it's kind of a hassle to drive down there. And so it just piles up, you know, in my basement. Yeah, these sort of subscription services, I think, could be starting to build out some of that curbside infrastructure. So there's some interesting, you know, activity there.
Yeah, no, great point, Matt.
Okay, to add to that, I guess like one concern too is for example, plastic, technically it's recyclable, or say plastic bottles are very recyclable, but what percentage of plastic actually gets recycled in most countries? So I'm also curious, does it make sense for the packaging to be, say, compostable too, in case people don't reuse them? So then, it doesn't harm the environment if it gets thrown out or something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the compostable stuff is it gets kind of hairy depending on what you're talking about, right? So like some of the more plastic-like things that are supposedly compostable, require sort of a very special facility. You can't just compost them in your garden. I hear all kinds of things about what exactly is the impact of that. I think those are tough kind of tough things to figure out, and I think we're still trying to figure out what the right thing is there. I would say that with reuse systems, one of the benefits is that if you can really get it to work at scale and you're aggregating all this stuff for reuse, the items that reach end of life can be sorted out by the collector, and then you've got a whole bunch of recyclable stuff essentially pre-sorted for recycling in one place that was basically the fallout of the reuse process. And I think that pre-sorting can go a long way to improving the economics of recycling at the end of life after you've done all the reuse you can do.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, that's a good point. So what are a few things that you're both finding to be, working, going really well? The day-to-day is pretty challenging, but if you had to look on, one thing that's going right, what would it be?
I think in general, in my experience at least, I talk a lot and work a lot with CPGs and their retailers. And again, CPG is just those brands that you find in your grocery shelf, is that they are hearing a lot from customers that this is what they want, and it's starting to become something where they're really making it a priority, not just in a sense where it's let's just set up this one initiative and have it be done with, but a lot of them are realizing that if they're going to do something like this, it actually has to be an effective system, and people can they're going to be seeing through that the greenwashing more and more so now. So it's becoming easier for us to reach out to a company, explain to them what we're doing, and them immediately seeing the value. And even in 2 years, that's become night and day in terms of businesses being receptive to it. So that's really exciting. And whenever someone asks, it's like, what can I do to help? That's always the type of thing. It's like, I don't think customers realize how impactful that one conversation they have with the manager or owner of a business can be for them to switch over, because they assume, rightfully so, that one customer reflects 1,000, 10,000 more who just haven't said anything yet. So those conversations are really impactful. And it's just, it's becoming much easier to have that conversation, even if they end up having some reason for not joining. It's becoming much easier.
Yeah, that's so true. I feel like a lot of people definitely feel as though they can't control how things are managed, especially people with eco anxiety. We're always looking for like reasons to help and do things, but it can feel really like helpless. So that's a really good point to make. Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Well, so I'll add on to that. I came across an article the other day, and I ended up making a little infographic about it for some of my social media posts. But there was a survey that was done by, I may be getting this wrong, it was something like the American Restaurant Association, a restaurant trade association, where they surveyed chefs for restaurant trends for 2022. And the number one, is a list of the top 10 trends that they heard. Number one was sustainable packaging. And this is,
Wow.
there were other things on the list that were foods, this type of food is trendy.
Mhm.
But number one was sustainable packaging. And in fact, I think the first top four were all packaging related. So I think the voice of the consumer, at least in that restaurant context, and I imagine applies to many other things as well, is starting to come through. And I think, we all kind of see that. But, in terms of the, you're asking about the day to day. So, I've spent a lot of time talking to breweries recently, and I've really been enjoying that. Brewers are a surprising number of them are really interested in sustainability. Maybe not surprising, but it's pretty common that these are people who care about that stuff. These are mostly smallish businesses, and so they're people that are really right up against the challenges. If you talk to sustainability people in a big corporate context, you'll hear certain challenges that they have, but they may not be the people that are like literally getting their hands dirty with part of the operational mission. These brewers, like they're in it, and everything from the raw materials to packaging, and they'll be very blunt about what works and what doesn't work, and if they think your idea is dumb or not, and that's as an entrepreneur, that's great feedback, even if it's negative. Which I don't get too much negative feedback, but to have those kind of conversations is really good. So I've been enjoying that for sure.
That's great. No, that's so good to hear. So we do have some more questions in the chat. I'm just going to read them. Actually, Petra asked, industry has championed single use with the point that it has less carbon emissions versus reusable has more. Is this a fair point? To me, reusable limits that material waste by extending product life or reprocessing, but which has a greener impact. And then Mario then put in the chat, he's seen some content comparing single-use plastic. And then, it does depend on, how often that bag is reused. But do either of you have some insight? Maybe you've heard this in the field and have had to challenge that too.
I think there are so many products and so many use cases that you really, I don't think you can really make a blanket statement. It really goes back to, the specific product, how it's used, how the reuse system is implemented. Going back to sort of my example with Coca-Cola, if you said today, well, Coca-Cola, you need to use reusable bottles, reusable glass bottles. So just go around and swap every plastic bottle 1 for 1 with glass. You would undoubtedly increase the footprint of their operations, because all you've done is now you have them shipping around something that weighs twice as much, right? So if you do nothing other than swap one material for another, you could easily find that you have a negative result. What you need to do is think about the system, and like we were talking about, maybe centralized distribution doesn't make sense for reusable packaging, right? And so that's the kind of nuance I think that you need to capture when you're doing that life cycle analysis. It's really down to the nitty gritty of how it's implemented.
And I mean, as referenced in the chat, I think in general, reusable materials, their initial carbon footprint is, again, in general, not always going to be true, is higher. And that's just because, for example, like I have my glass jar here, that's going to, take more emissions almost every time than, a small plastic container of the same variety, simply just due to weight, like, you know, Matt was mentioning the capability to nest and things like that. So like it's important to be, you know, as people who are really interested in sustainability, it's important to be fully disclosing that there are, you know, these downsides, but that they can be overcome through system development. But also, just as was mentioned, as we reuse something more, it becomes, you know, better for the environment. Its emissions are reduced. I would recommend everyone to just always be, I love them, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Yeah.
They have a lot of great reports. There's some reports that say, you know, reusable packaging in certain sectors can decrease emissions by up to 80%. And that's even with the current formats and, you know, standards we have. So it is truly how we reuse them. And what I'm also most excited about is, you know, the future of reuse. I think we're still stuck in the, you know, mindset that the only way for us to reuse packaging is with glass, stainless steel, rigid plastics. What is almost bound to happen is we're going to see you know, a breathtaking amount of innovation in the space for even packaging formats that are, you know, compactable, they are nestable, but they're also reusable, and they're, you know, they don't use many resources, but they can be used a ton of times. And we're going to be shifting from, you know, centralized reuse systems that we've been seeing, to, you know, decentralized. There's some companies in the space I know that, you know, run reuse programs in Ontario, and they still ship everything back to New Jersey because they don't have that infrastructure in Ontario yet. So
Yeah.
I think when you look at reuse right now, it can have some of those downsides, but
Yeah.
it's also so exciting when you look at, you know, the potential of it in the future, even when it comes to, you know, emissions from transportation. You know, 20, 30 years, I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I think a lot of that will be, you know, EV. And so what we're seeing as, you know, emissions right now, being, you know, where a lot of emissions from reuse comes from being transportation, a lot of that will be offset, I believe, in the future. And more, even more so with the initial manufacturing and with green energy sources. So I'm really excited for that. And for me, the, you know, the main objective was just let's get this waste out of our environment. It's such a,
Yeah.
you know, basic and you know, thing. So that's where my focus is, and that sort of all depends on your, you know, term of what's the most green, if you will.
Yeah, it's definitely a stepwise process, and it's not going to happen, you know, overnight. But I like how you flipped the narrative there at the end, being excited. It is an exciting time. Like the transition is very exciting, and whether that's, you know, the energy transition or the circular transition, I think it's all encompassing. And yeah, it's going to be, we're going to see a lot of new, very cool innovations coming up, you know, in along with both of your businesses. So with that said, let's open the floor up to, you know, any last questions or comments, or we can get into another discussion for the rest of the time, or we can wrap up, doesn't matter. Whoever wants to ask questions, the floor is out there.
What I will do right now, as I'm sure some people are maybe writing some questions down, is I'll put my email in the chat, and if anyone wants to talk and just chat, you know, reusables, I'm sure you're all as passionate about it as I am. I'm more than happy to, you know, have that conversation with you, answer any questions offline as well. Yeah, so I'll just put that in the chat, and yeah, feel free to ask me any questions there as well if you're not feeling 100% comfortable doing it right now.
Yeah, I just put mine in there too.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. And yeah, that's we love making connections. So that's what this space is all about. Awesome. So is there anything that both of you are working on currently? Like, do you have any projects maybe that are different than what you usually work on, that you maybe want to talk about?
Well, so I'm you know, I just launched my my site in the middle of January, so I'm in kind of full on you know, marketing business development mode, trying to drive users to the site. You know, going back to these things, I'm seeding efforts to collect these in a few different places. I've got one locally where I live, one in the Seattle area, one in the Denver area, one in the Boston area. And so, trying to really drive, really drive that collection and resale. The other thing that I didn't really talk about in terms of Iterant's business model is, the long-term goal is actually to push these problems back upstream, kind of like we were talking about, where you get to the point where it's, there are design decisions made around reuse, and design decisions made around marketing and distribution and stuff like that. So I've actually built into the Iterant platform a provision to incentivize the manufacturers to think about reuse by providing them with a revenue stream through royalties based on their products getting transacted. So the more their piece of packaging, company who makes this is called PackTech, the more this thing gets circulated, the more money PackTech can make. And my hope is to actually flip a whole bunch of industries to reuse first, because it's just a better business than single use.
Yeah, that's a great way to incentivize businesses to participate and keep it in circular. And that's awesome. That's very cool, actually. Charles, what about you?
Yeah, one of the things we're working on a lot right now is that, as we discussed earlier, that customer behavior piece. We have some stuff that's just in the pilot stage, that's just all around boosting reuse rates, making reuse even more powerful for businesses by helping them understand, different things like customer behaviors, but also for the customer themselves, getting them, discounts, points, coupons, really testing the right mix and just getting the highest reuse rate possible back. But there's a question in the chat about, who are the leaders in the space? And, Mario beat me to the punch. The sort of what we see as one of our competitors is Loop. In that sense, though, I think it's sort of funny when we talk about competitors, it's always like, I love it when they make a new announcement or partnership. It's like,
Yeah.
Awesome. Like, I just want to see this get done.
For pushing the needle regardless. Yeah.
And it's not only beneficial to the reuse ecosystem, but also to us, because more companies are opening up to it. So they're awesome. Their founder is Tom Sazaki. He's also the founder of TerraCycle, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Loop is their new sister company. It's doing great work in reuse, but there's also companies all over the world that are doing great stuff, like Algramo, I always mess up their name. They're Spanish based. And in terms of local companies, I'm not sure how many of you are Toronto based, but if you are, there's great refilleries all over Toronto, from, Green and Frugal, Equinamore, Sapinetti. There's even reuse companies in Toronto that operate in the more takeout space versus ours being the grocery space. And those are, Muse, Supply. There's also a friendlier company that operates in some of the outer regions of the GTA, and now Ottawa. So, there are so many great reuse companies out there. I actually have a document just called Sustainable Companies, and I would share with you if it wasn't, if it wasn't just a million pages of links to companies that I'm like, oh, they're so cool. So, there's all these great companies out there. And it's, it's just really so exciting to see them. But there's so many great local and national leaders in the space.
Yeah, and Impact Zero is actually working on a circular directory right now to be able to share like local organizations and businesses that are like circular approved, or I'm pretty sure circular approved, not just sustainable approved, but like actually like going the step further and being circular. So that's something to look forward to in the future. I don't know when it'll be ready, but hopefully, near term.
I would say with regard to that question, I know this was sort of, we're here to talk about packaging, but if you open it up to kind of the larger circularity space, there's a lot of there's a lot of work being done in sort of the apparel space.
Mm,
And in some ways that I would almost say that that's probably, that industry is maybe the furthest ahead in sort of some of those companies like Trove, or some of the other ones that are doing sort of the white labeling of resale. They're working with, big, multinational brands to set up
mhm,
reuse systems for, for apparel. And so,
mhm.
that's happening. I think, people are, again, experimenting with business models, but, some of those companies are, so some of the startup companies are, unicorns at this point, billion-dollar valuations. So I mean, it's not necessarily a perfect metric, but it speaks to sort of the pent up demand there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting time for sure. Did anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask Charles or Matt? If not, that's okay. Actually, Charles, I think I had a question. Okay, so because you've been in the space for almost 2 years now, right? Circular.
Yeah, about 2 years. We
About 2
were
years.
doing some funky stuff in the beginning, but yeah,
Yeah.
2 years is a good description.
Yeah. How would you say, like, I know you were saying it's been a bit of a change coming into the, seeing how businesses have been receptive of your services. I guess, like, could you give a bit of a lay of the land of like what types of businesses? Are they small business owners? Are they a bit larger corporations? Like,
Yeah.
just to get a feel of like who's asking for these right now, just at the current time.
Well, I think so. All the businesses we talk to in some dimension have customers, like I said, reaching out to the businesses and saying, this is something we need.
Mhm,
Primarily we talk to small and medium sized businesses,
mhm.
but even that is such a huge dimension
Yeah.
in terms of scale of what they actually produce. A small business can produce 50 a month.
Mhm,
But a small business in still that same demographic really can produce thousands.
mhm.
So it's really interesting when you look at that dimension. But even the largest company we talked to,
Mhm.
who's medium sized, 10,000 a month jar, or 10,000 a day jars rather.
Wow.
They're motivated around this because, one, they know it's the right thing to do, but also
Mhm.
because their customers are asking for it. The conversation simply shifts on a few other dimensions, understandably, because they need to know, is it going to be cost effective?
Yeah.
Who's going to be running this system? So they have much more due diligence
Mhm.
around that. But again, they're a bit slower moving. Understandably, again, they have much more volume they're pushing.
Right.
So the conversation just shifts slightly. But I would say that message is getting through in both scenarios.
Mhm.
And I haven't talked to a Unilever or a Coke or anything yet. Not
Not
really.
yet. Soon.
Yeah, yeah. Eventually we'll be across Canada and all that fun stuff. But
Yeah. No, that's
yeah,
great.
right now the message is getting through. It's just the
Yeah.
conversation just shifts slightly based off scale.
Mhm, mhm. No, that's it's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. I don't know whether anybody had any last points to add. Feel free. But if not, we can close out the show.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm sure Matt's the same. Just email us if you have any questions. We're always on the phone with people who are in the space or who are just
Yeah.
interested. So it's always fun for us to connect.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep. I would also say we've got there are a number of sort of groups that you can join if you want to see some kind of ongoing discussion of these things. There's the Impact Zero group. There's also, I'm on a couple of different Slack groups that are broadly sustainability focused, but have a circular economy channel on the Slack group. And so the one I use the most is the Work on Climate Slack. They have a circular economy channel. I think we've got like almost 250 people on that. some good, meetups and discussion of circularity and stuff like that. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Matt. And then we're also doing our, oh my gosh, it's already April next month. Then we're doing our Explore series next month. I believe it's going to be April 9th. So everyone can show up for that. And it'll be on a different topic, not circular packaging, unfortunately, but another circular topic. But yeah, so thank you so much, Matt and Charles, and everyone else for joining tonight. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great evening. So thank you so much again for joining.
yeah, thank you.
Of course. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Take
Bye.
care.